Hello and welcome to the big picture. Despite the physical distance between India and Cuba, Cuba has always held a great deal of charm among Indians. Che Guevara, Fidel Castro have almost been household names in many parts of the country. This has always resulted in the two countries having maintained good relations. However, the relations between Cuba and the United States, which had been frozen since 1961 as the two Cold War rivals severed diplomatic ties in 1961, had affected Cuba being part of many developments in the world. Last December, a change has been heralded, with the United States deciding to resume diplomatic ties with Cuba. Meanwhile, India, which has always wanted better ties, especially economic ties, has been handicapped by the US embargo. Now that it is likely to be lifted, India can expect opening up of avenues. Meanwhile, the Cuban first Vice President, Miguel Diaz-Canel Bermudez, has arrived in India today on a 3-day bilateral visit. How will this visit improve the ties between the two nations, and can we expect the momentum to pick up in various fields? What is the political and diplomatic significance of the visit in the context of India and Cuba being close partners in the non-aligned grouping for a long time? We will discuss all this today with Bhaskar Balakrishnan, former Indian ambassador to Cuba, Professor Abudl Nafey of Center for Canadian, US and Latin American Studies in the JNU, Nilotpal Basu, Central Committee member CPI-M, and KP Nayar, consulting editor, The Telegraph. I'm also joined by my colleague Akhilesh, who will be telling us about what this visit is all about. Welcome to all of you. Akhilesh, first to you, what is on cards during this 3-day visit of the Cuban first Vice President?
Girish, what has happened today that Cuban Vice President has already met Vice President Mohammad Hamid Ansari, but he is again going to meet him in the evening where banquet is to be hosted in the Hyderabad house. And whatever agreements has to be signed, it will be signed on that occasion. But in the meantime, the Cuban Vice President has met Prime Minister Narendra Modi and President Pranab Mukherjee. So you can understand that the basics of the visit has already been decided. And what is going to be happening in the evening, it will be symbolic in nature, because one of the major agreements that is going to be signed is of consular nature, because even the diplomats don't have the visa exemption between India and Cuba. So this is the one agreement that is going to be signed in the agreement in the evening, that Indian diplomats will visit Cuba anytime as they wish. And Cuban diplomats will also visit India anytime as they wish and according to their work. And another agreement that is on card is between in the pharmaceutical and healthcare sector, because Girish, you know that Cuba is one of the major countries which have very affordable and very well established healthcare system, and India wants to take advantage of that healthcare system in India, because as you know, the government's healthcare system is always criticized by everyone, even in the outside and inside the country. So I think one of the major agreements that may be signed in the evening is the healthcare system. Another is related to biotechnology, and biotechnology, India has some expertise in biotechnology and Cuban wants to get advantage from this biotechnology. And as you are saying that there is no impediment between payment crisis between India and Cuba, so I think India has crossed that bridge, that there was a payment crisis of how Cuba will pay the and how India will pay. So this after lifting of US sanction, this crisis has been overcome, and this is going to be one of the major jump in the two nations as far as economic relations are concerned. And one of the major things that is oil. Cuba has a major oil resource in its coffer, and once these impediments are over, I think India can get advantage of Cuban oil. Girish.
Okay, thank you, Akhilesh. Thanks for joining and telling us all about it. Mr. Balakrishnan, how significant is this visit?
Well, as you said, this visit is taking place at a very interesting time. First of all, of course, there is a thaw in the relationship with the US, which started in December and which is continuing now with negotiations directly between Cuba and the US. Secondly, there is a phase of economic reform in Cuba which has been launched some months ago, and at the same time there is a kind of leadership transition taking place in Cuba, with Raul Castro, who is 84, who is likely to hand over in 2018 to the next generation of Cuban leaders. And the top of that list is first Vice President Miguel Diaz-Canel. who's visiting India. So this visit is very important for India and Cuba to establish contacts at the next level of Cuban leadership.
Okay. Mr. Balakrishnan, as far as the Cuban-US relations are concerned and what kind of impact it will have on India, as far as US is concerned, are they, I mean, there have been two rounds of talks between the two countries and the third meeting has also taken place. But how keen are the US to ensure that this resumption is done rapidly, or do you think that it will take much longer time?
Well, the moves made by President Obama, who carried out secret negotiations with Cuba to reach this stage, they have already created a lot of opposition, especially among the Republican parties in Congress.
Right.
So the hardliners in the US are saying that they will block this process. But President Obama is convinced that the Cuban-American voters, the new generation of voters, are going to be happy with this process. And outside of Florida and the other states of the US, there is a big business lobby which wants normal business ties with Cuba. They see many advantages and jobs created by this process.
Right.
So this will take some time, but it will be a steady move. Meanwhile, at the 7th Summit of the Americas next month, Panama has invited the Cuban leadership to come. Now, normally this would be strongly opposed by the US government. But in this case, the US administration is willing to let Cuba attend this summit, although there is strong opposition from among the Republicans in Congress. So opinion in the US, there is still a battle going on, but I think over a period of time, things will move.
Okay. Nilotpal, how do you see this? As far as India is concerned, you think that, by making this kind of Indian Vice President was in Cuba in 2013, now their Vice President is here. What kind of relationship do you envisage?
I think this visit is very positive in the sense that, as you rightly pointed out while prefacing this discussion, that the traditional spectacle is that huge hug between President Fidel and Indira Gandhi at the time of the summit of NAM in New Delhi.
In 1983.
Now you see, it is very true that ultimately the United States have also perhaps realized that what they were doing towards Cuba is counterproductive. First of all, this is a region where Cuba plays a very important role. Today, if you see the whole of the Latin American and Caribbean region, Cubans have tremendous political and, more importantly, moral influence on the region. So that way, I think normalizing the relationship, whether the first steps have been taken, that Cuban 5 have been released, but on many other fronts, I think they have to go ahead. But I think it makes perfect sense because Cuba, for example, your reporter was pointing out that in the sphere of health, similarly in the sphere of education also. In fact, the whole sphere of human development, the Cubans have done exceedingly well and their model is very cost effective. So for a country like India, I mean, we have to draw lessons. Secondly, Cuba has opened up in a big way its tourism. And I think with the Indians traveling abroad in such huge numbers, that is one other area where Indians have an opportunity, apart from biotechnology and all that which is being mentioned. But more importantly, I think India, from a foreign policy perspective, has to take much greater interest in the Latin American region with, again, sort of tensions arising between the US and the Venezuelan government and Venezuela. I think Cuba is one country where India can look at in a positive manner to improve the relationship. Unfortunately, during the NDA government, I mean, there was really some drop in the level of warmth between India and Cuba. So that this visit, I think, if it is followed up with the kind of positivity with which the Vice President is being received, I think will be a good pace setter.
Okay, Professor Nafey. Professor Nafey, you know, one of the reasons for the kind of closeness which India and Cuba had was the non-aligned summit, being partners in non-aligned summit. We are in a different world now. You know, non-alignment is not as much of an important thing as it was. So how does India and Cuban relations, you know, prosper in this kind of an environment?
2-3 points and very quick. Almost for the 2 years, the first Vice President who is on an official visit today has been in line of succession. What Ambassador Balakrishnan was saying sounds to me very true. Number 2, for India, it is pure business. 2-3 areas are very important. Not many in India know the tremendous achievements Cuba has made in the field of medicine and biotechnology. We were not able to actually engage Cuba in science and technology because of the US embargo. As the relation gets relaxed, then India would be the first one to collaborate in the field of biotechnology and health, especially medicines. Number 2, again, Cuba is sitting on huge oil wealth. Deep waters of Cuba, and then you follow coastal Venezuela, Suriname, French Guiana. It's a huge oil. Already OVL, our Videsh, ONGC Videsh is there. I think for us it is pure business, especially in the field of science and technology and energy.
Okay. KP, is it pure business? What is it? What is the political significance?
You see, my reading in diplomatic terms in the context of the Cuban first Vice President's visit is that of a long-distance runner who has been ahead of the race, of the pack in every lap. But in the final 2 laps, India being the long-distance runner, has yielded ground and lost the race, you know. We neglected the relationship with Cuba. I think Mr. Basu wanted to say was that during the UPA government, not the NDA government, I think.
Started with the NDA government.
The previous NDA government.
Right, okay. So, you know, we neglected the relationship with Cuba. S.M. Krishna, on his personal initiative, went to Cuba in 2012. That was the first foreign minister's visit in 23 years. So this has happened in Cuba. This has happened in Iran. It's now happening in Iran. Once the United States and the P5+1 signs the deal, you know, we neglected the relationship with Iran. To a lesser extent, it has happened in Myanmar, where the Americans came in. And you know, with all these countries, once the Americans are in, they don't need India, you know. So we didn't nurture these relationships. But it is to the credit of Cuba that the first Vice President has taken the initiative. It's a Cuban initiative, and he has made this trip. He's not on a regional tour. He went to Namibia Namibia for the inauguration of the new president, South Africa, Angola, and he has taken the trouble of coming here. So I think it's very good that the Prime Minister has met the Vice President. We should seize this opportunity, and there is such a lot of goodwill for India in Cuba, and we should try to revive the relationship and make up for lost time.
Yes, Nilotpal.
One quick point. I mean, so far as Mr. Krishna is concerned, to be fair to him, he is a very active part of the Cuba Solidarity Committee that we have here in India. Secondly, I think Mr. Nayar is making that point very correctly, because you see, Cuba today has come to enjoy a lot of, moral sympathy and support all across the world, because they have made not just achievements in health, but health as a major component of their foreign policy and diplomacy. I mean, some of the Cuban doctors, they lost their life in fighting the Ebola virus, and wherever. I mean, they said that we don't send soldiers but doctors. So I think India has much to gain positively from this relationship with Cuba, and as Professor was pointing out, I mean, hydrocarbon is another area, and we must diversify our engagement with different regions, and from that standpoint, I mean, Cuba is a very crucial player.
Okay, Mr. Balakrishnan. Mr. Balakrishnan, do you agree with KP's assessment that, and also Nilotpal was saying, that there was some amount of neglect in between the in the relations with Cuba, and why, if there was neglect, why did it happen, and if it has been, if the relationship has improved, why and how has it been done?
Well, the facts on the ground do not give a picture of neglect. First of all, we have written off the debts of Cuba. We have extended new lines of credit to Cuba at a time when they were really suffering from the economic embargo of the US. It's not just the sanctions, it's a total economic blockade which the US imposed. So we have done some measures on the financial side to help Cuba. Now, as far as oil exploration is concerned, there is, of course, there were prospects in the deep water area in North Cuba, but the initial 2 or 3 wells drilled have been disappointing. So now the international interest is focused on the near onshore part of northern Cuba, where there is drilling going on, and that seems a bit promising, although it will be heavy crude. Now, we have also set up a center for information technology in Cuba, which has already trained some 900 Cuban in IT sector. Then we have, of course, had a collaboration with Cuba in biotechnology. Biocon and Cuban organization have signed a joint venture. They have put up a plant in Bangalore to manufacture monoclonal antibodies for treating a very bad type of cancer of the brain. And this is a unique product. So Biocon has worked with the Cubans to do the clinical trials and to make the product more widely acceptable internationally. So in a way, we have done our bit, of course, given the distance and the kind of distractions of our political leadership and so on. And of course, Cuba has had its own share of problems, the economic problems. The economy is highly controlled. It is not easy for a private sector or business to go into Cuba. Now, of course, that is going to change. I mean, there is going to be more room for private sector. There is an export processing zone being set up in Mariel. So, and with the US sanctions being lifted gradually, there will be a lot more opportunities for Indian business to get into Cuba, and we hope that will happen.
No, but Mr. Balakrishnan, KP Nayar's point that we have been slack in this in the way we have dealt with Cuba. Now that the Americans are entering it, there will be very little space for us, since the Americans will take over, or will have more interest there. How do you react to that?
Well, look, although the Americans were not in Cuba, the Canadians were there, the Europeans were there, the Chinese were there, the Russians were there. So we have been working in Cuba along with other players. So the Americans are not going to sweep everybody off the board. It will take a long time before the Americans can reach that stage. And of course, Cuba and the US, there are issues. On regional level, Cuba and US have differences over Venezuela. They have differences over the free trade agreement of the Americas, which the US is pushing. So it's not that a honeymoon will start with the US straight away. It will take a long time, and the Cuban leadership particularly is very cautious and is very careful in how they proceed.
Okay, yes, KP.
I appreciate the points made by Ambassador Bhaskar Balakrishnan, but with all respect to him, I would like to make a counterpoint. To give an example, when Ambassador Deepak Bhojwani retired, we didn't post an ambassador there, We left Cuba unmanned. And then...
for how long?
For nearly a year. And then Mr. Krishna decided that he will have the heads of missions, Latin American heads of missions meeting in
Cuba.
Havana. And then we had to rush Mr. Rajshekhar from London. He was given 6 days to go to Havana, from London, because he had to organize everything, So, there has been a benign neglect. It's not this government. It is actually the previous government. And non-aligned summit, Mr. Manmohan Singh was in two minds for a very long time whether he should go to Havana for the non-aligned summit, because he worried that it may upset the Americans. And actually, from the non-aligned summit, every year he goes to the UN for the General Assembly. He didn't go to New York that year because he felt that he didn't want to face the Americans after coming from Havana. This is very unfortunate.
Mr. Balakrishnan, would you like to react to that?
Well, the appointment of an ambassador is governed by various factors. It is only one strand in the overall relationship. So the relationship between Cuba and India has its own, momentum. And I think many players have played a role in this, including our friends on the left side of the left parties. They have been very active in building our relationship. And one must say that they have kept the momentum going. So this is only one small part of the overall relationship.
But
As for the US, there has never been a kind of feeling that you can't visit Cuba and then go to the US. I personally have visited the US when I was in Cuba many times, and there has never been any problem. So the US recognizes very well that diplomatic relationship, countries are free to have diplomatic ties with others, and they don't hold it against you. It is only when you make statements or you do something which affects their interests, then of course there is a problem.
Okay, yes.
I think it will be interesting to share this information. Today is the anniversary martyrdom of Bhagat Singh. Now the Cubans have actually informed us that they would like to erect a statue of Bhagat Singh. So
in Havana.
In Havana. And therefore, I mean, the Cubans are also very sensitive to the anti-imperialist legacy that India has. And what jocularly Mr. Nayar was relating to, I think the problem came up because we were also a little bit suffering from dilemma which strand in our Indo-Cuba relationship we should reinforce. And I think hyphenating our approach to countries with which way US will look at it, I think was a major misplaced emphasis.
Okay, Professor Nafey?
I am of the view that, US embargo.
The hyphenated relationship which he talks about, is it going to end now?
No. This is what is happening between Cuba and US.
So we are going to keep looking at Cuba through the prism of US.
Because this is the first round of moves Cuba and United States are making, and they are going to make many more moves towards each other.
Right.
Still, they have to go a very long distance.
Right.
Everyone is saying that Cuba is the gainer and United States is the loser. But one of the participants was saying that there is a heavy criticism on Obama as why did you make this breakthrough? But I am sure
there is a
more American conditionalities are going to come very soon.
Sorry?
More American conditionalities will be put before
More
Cuba.
American conditionalities. Yeah. KP, what is the kind of resistance Ambassador Balakrishnan was talking about, the Republican resistance there? You think that it will be overcome now with both the Congress being heavily pro-Republican, with a Republican majority? How much will Obama be able to push this day?
Actually, today is a very bad day to discuss Cuban-American relationship because Senator Ted Cruz, the Texas Republican, the Tea Party favorite, who's determined to roll back Obama's initiatives on Cuba, has just today decided that he will run for the 2016 election.
Okay.
So there is a lot of opposition, but as I think you mentioned, or one of the panelists mentioned, the younger voters, the Miami mafia that tried to run America's Cuban policy for decades, they are on the back foot, The young generation is really not so anti-Castro as they used to be. They want to go to Cuba. They have their own vision of maybe a fairy tale vision. But they have a vision of their motherland, original motherland.
It is just one sentence. I think with the growing multipolarity that we are seeing in the world today, I mean, Americans are not necessarily in a position to call the shots everywhere. So, the dynamics of the global processes themselves will have its impact on such questions.
Mr. Balakrishnan, would you agree with that? And now what kind of momentum do you see now after the visit of the Vice President now to India? And, what is it that we can expect in terms of improvement in the ties between India and Cuba?
Well, I think we have good potential for working on economic projects, the lines of credit. I think several other lines of credit tied to projects are being discussed. In the IT sector, the Cubans are very well educated and, they can work with our companies as far as the Spanish-speaking IT service market is concerned. They are already active in this field. Biotechnology, the Cubans have got some unique products and they could be of interest to us. Sports is another very big area. The Cuba is a small country of 11 million, yet they get 14 or 15 medals in the Olympics.
Right.
So the outstanding performance in sports. And they have a completely integrated sports system, starting from sports medicine to psychological conditioning of athletics. So they have been working with our Army Sports Institute and we have seen the results in the boxing field.
Right.
We've been able to get some medals. So sports is a very good area of cooperation where we could benefit. And it was mentioned that Cuban public health system is excellent. Their health indicators are among the best in the Western Hemisphere. It is not a high-tech operation. It is largely social engineering, very simple primary health care with a very determined focus by the government.
Mr.
Similarly, in the education sphere, they have achieved literacy 100%.
Right.
So they have programs whereby they are helping other countries to achieve 100% literacy.
Mr. Balakrishnan,
some of these programs could be of interest to us.
Mr. Balakrishnan, very quickly, what is it that Cuba will expect from India? Because, as far as diplomatic relations are concerned, can India, help in quickly that isolation which Cuba has felt all these years? How is India been able to help Cuba and what is it that Cuba will expect from India?
Well, Cuba is looking for more Indian investment in Cuba, especially when they are opening up some new avenues for investment. They would like more Indian investment to come into Cuba. Now, this will have to be worked out. They are interested in getting Indian companies into the oil and gas sector. So OVL will probably take a second look at it. During my time there, OVL had started the whole operation. But then now they feel that its prospects were not so good. Maybe they look at it again. And of course, in the IT sector, the cooperation will continue because the Cuban base, manpower base, is excellent quality.
Okay. Professor Nafey, very quick last words. The improvement in relations.
I think one area we have...
And any political or diplomatic expectations of the Cubans as far as India is concerned?
At the political diplomatic level, Cuba would be among the leading limelights of these new countries, India and South Africa and Brazil and some of these emerging, pushing for multipolarity.
Yes.
A Cuba without embargo is going to be politically very active, more so in Latin America. I think it is in the very nature of the Cubans. Politically, diplomatically, they remain very active and they have a good foreign service and very agile class of academics and intellectuals.
KP, last word, very quickly.
I would like to point out that while the UPA government has let the relationship with Cuba slide, other players have stepped in. For instance, Salman Khan was in Havana. He shot Ek Tha Tiger.
Yes.
He shot it there.
So the cultural aspect of it can restore the soft power.
We did a film festival. There is an Indian restaurant there now, although it's run by a Sri Lankan. The restaurant's name is Bollywood.
Okay, the soft power of Indians in Cuba, that is, and also the other things which all my guests have mentioned. It will be interesting to watch how all this will unfold as Americans and Cubans get closer. Please keep watching. We'll come back with another issue, a big picture. Thanks to all my guests.